Good afternoon, and I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's live webinar entitled Spreadsheet Validation, Rumors, Risks, and Reality. Before we get into the agenda for today's session is sponsored and brought to you by Xybion Corporation. Just want to take a few minutes and tell you a little bit about who Xybion is and what the company provides in the industry. As a corporation, Xybion has been around since 1997, a privately held company with a variety of different key certifications, including the NMSDC government certification. Our product line that we deliver at Xybion is very much focused around supporting companies that are operating in heavily and highly regulated industries. As such, we find ourselves doing a large percentage of the work that we do for companies for global life sciences companies. This includes everything from R&D solutions to GRC and BPM solutions, asset management, content management. We have global locations in New Jersey and Pennsylvania in the United States, Quebec City in Canada, Germany in EMEA, and India in Asia Pacific. The global services that we deliver to companies include innovative development and testing with a center of excellence located in India, quality testing and development services, as well as internal product development and support. The value proposition that we bring to our customers is first and foremost a lower total cost of ownership for enterprise technologies. We deliver enterprise products and services and solutions that are designed to power innovation and efficiency at your organization. Xybion offers a comprehensive set of industry solutions that are used by major enterprises across the globe. Processes are all meant to be brought under one roof so that we lower the total cost of ownership through validated software, and services that are implemented through a global hybrid resource model based in the US, Canada, and India. Without going through each bullet point, it'll be important to note, however, that our focus areas are on GRC, preclinical, quality management, ECM migration and consolidation, EAM, validation, and testing. I want to briefly introduce today's speaker, Harry Huss. It's very much a pleasure to have Harry speak to us today. He's an industry thought leader with 25 years experience in the pharmaceutical sector. He's the executive director of Brandywine Consulting today, which is a compliance consulting firm, and he's held positions such as senior director of compliance policy and program support services at Charles River, associate director of computer validation QA at Merck, regulatory compliance manager at SmithKline Beecham. Today, Harry is very involved in a number of different organizations, most notably the SQA. Harry is a frequent speaker and educator with that group, and it's very much our pleasure to have Harry join us today and talk to us about this important topic. So with that, Harry, I want to bring it over to you, have you come on and tell us a little bit about some of the areas that you're going to touch on today, and then let you kind of start to work through the content.
Thank you, Kevin. First, thank you everyone for joining us today on what I think to be a very important and relevant topic. I'd like to thank Kevin and Xybion for providing us this opportunity. Xybion always does seem to step to the forefront as it relates to the pharma industry and life sciences in general, and I greatly do appreciate it. Today we're going to have a quick introduction. As the title indicates, we're going to talk about some rumors, some realities, and risks associated with these wonderful spreadsheets that we use. We will have a quick summary, and then hopefully some discussion. Actually, we won't have discussion, but we will have questions, and then I will try to answer them as best as I can. Next slide, please, Kevin. Okay, this is one of my favorite slides with the gypsy fortune teller and the gentleman who is representing, I guess, whatever company that you're in. Whenever we talk about compliance programs, there's always that time where you need to sit down with your QA group and your management group and try to figure out what is going to be our compliance strategy as we move forward. And with spreadsheets, that compliance strategy has to balance the realities and risks against the plethora of rumors that surround these spreadsheet systems. Next slide, please, Kevin. As you can see, rumors abound. I'm going to hit a few of my favorite. These are by no means all the rumors. I think I could write a book on the rumors that surround spreadsheet use in the pharmaceutical life sciences industry. We're going to hit a few of them and talk a little bit about the relative value of rumors. Next slide, please, Kevin. Okay. My very favorite rumor is that, and this seems to be pervasive, that the FDA has indicated that commercially available spreadsheets really can't be validated and you shouldn't use them for regulated activities. This is patently false. I'm not exactly sure how this got started. I've asked a number of my friends and colleagues at the agencies, both past and present, how did this get started? Nobody really seems to know. But the reality is that the FDA hasn't indicated you can't use spreadsheets or any other category of system from supporting regulated activities. They are abundantly aware that we use spreadsheets and certainly don't discourage it. They simply want us to validate them. Next slide, please, Kevin. Now, kind of the opposite side or the reflection side of that rumor number one is that the FDA has indicated that because spreadsheets are so widely used, that they're deemed to be automatically reliable and therefore you don't need to validate them. Again, I'm not exactly sure where this came from, but clearly the FDA has not exempted spreadsheets or, again, any other category of system from compliance with regulations when such systems are used in the regulated environment to support regulated activities. There simply aren't exemptions. You hear people talk about, well, the FDA uses spreadsheets. Well, that's true, but it doesn't really mean anything. Please remember there's really only one division in the FDA that has to abide by the regulations that we do because the FDA itself is not asking the government for licensure. So now that doesn't apply to NCPS, but nonetheless, nothing is exempted from the regulations as it applies to computerized systems. Next slide, please. Okay, this is widely mined. I don't know why, but FDA indicated end users of spreadsheet systems can employ the quote-unquote calculator rule to avoid validation, thereby conducting a verification of any arithmetic calculations. This might be a perversion of something that the FDA did when Part 11 first came out, and they gave what they called the typewriter exception, where you would use a word processing program to produce an SOP or something like that. And people asked, did you have to validate the word processing program? And the agency said, well, no, if you're just using it as a typewriter and you're relying on the printed spreadsheet, that's printed SOP, then you don't need to do that. The calculator rule is an interesting perversion of that. Next slide, please. The FDA simply doesn't have a calculator rule. Certainly you can use a handheld calculator when you're validating a spreadsheet to try and verify independently the accuracy of calculations. But certainly validation controls for a computerized system, including spreadsheets, is much broader than just arithmetic accuracy. Things like security and audit trail, what's it linked to, what type of data is being input, what's the outputs, what are the reports, how are you going to archive these records, configuration management, your various controls that go in with a computerized system. The only thing I can say is that it is interesting. I do know in the past one young FDA representative was at a meeting that I had attended, and a company had asked him, we have purchased essentially a company, and some of the records that we have, some of the paper records, were obviously produced by a spreadsheet, but we don't have the spreadsheet available to us, and there was no validation. What can we do? And the young gentleman correctly indicated you should at least try to verify the accuracy of any arithmetic calculations that were used in your regulated records in an attempt to mitigate this noncompliance. It wasn't long after that some of my colleagues called me up and said, oh, I understand that the FDA said you don't have to validate spreadsheets anymore. So it's easy to see how these rumors get started. People take things completely out of context. Handheld calculators certainly are great to verify arithmetic calculations, but it doesn't answer so many of the other controls that are critical to compliance. Next, please. FDA has indicated, and this one has caught on like fire. FDA has indicated a company can avoid validation of spreadsheets by documenting a risk assessment indicating, basically due to widespread use of spreadsheets, these things are deemed to be ultimately reliable, the risk is low, and therefore we don't have to validate any of our current or future uses of spreadsheet systems. Next slide, please. I want to be clear about risk assessment because this is so widely misunderstood. FDA has repeatedly indicated that risk assessment is not an alternative to compliance. A company cannot, absolve itself from responsibility or immunize itself to compliance requirements by simply writing a risk assessment. And it's not just the FDA that has said that. The EU has said it. The MHRA has said it. The FDA in China has said. I mean, all of these regulated bodies are quite clear that you can't just do a risk assessment that is targeted at just avoiding regulations. FDA has been very clear. Computerized systems must be validated for their intended use. Now, certainly risk assessment has its place. It certainly is great to determine the relative criticality of a system. You can certainly use it to determine the level of testing needed for individual system requirements, the level of mitigation or remediation that might be necessary for potential script failures. I think that's an excellent use of risk assessment. Can something be mitigated at the test script level when there's a problem, or does it need to go to management depending on the criticality of an individual system requirement? But applicable regulatory requirements remain as requirements. That's why they call them requirements. Next slide, please. It is interesting. Each week I buy a Powerball ticket, and that is my dream. That and Kevin knows I'm a fisherman. My dream of winning Powerball and going to Key West, Florida, and fishing away my remaining days on this earth. But then Saturday comes around, and I look at the numbers, and reality sets in. And that is something that people have experienced relative to their use of spreadsheets. Next slide, please. When you look at warning letters and 483 citations, those that are targeted at spreadsheets are certainly more numerous than any other category of computerized system. So the thought that FDA gives you a buy on spreadsheets is simply inaccurate, and any review, long-term or short-term, of 483 and warning letter citations should tell you that. There's probably a number of reasons for this, but certainly the three that I think are most important are that we simply have a large number of spreadsheets. I was recently at a medium-sized company, and when I asked them about their spreadsheet control, their IT CIO said, well, I think we probably have less than 100 spreadsheets throughout the company. And this company did GLP, GMP, and GCP at a number of different sites. And he said, we probably have less than 100, but we should probably look into that. Well, by the end of the week, over 400 had been identified. So there's a large number of spreadsheets out there, some that we know about, many that we don't. Management. If you go to management and you want to buy a new toxicology system and you're asking for a very large amount of money and resources to validate that system, management becomes very involved and they become very focused on it. However, spreadsheets tend to take place more at the end user level and management support for validation monies and resources to validate these is not as readily available. And lastly, this is no secret to anybody. FDA investigators, QA auditors, people like myself, everyone knows that spreadsheet systems are just all over the place and they're often not well controlled. We all know that spreadsheet systems, the commercial spreadsheet systems, do have deficiencies. They're wonderful tools, but they do have some deficiencies as it relates to security and audit trails. Please remember that the pharma industry is a small piece of the market for those people who produce these spreadsheet systems, for instance, like Excel. Microsoft did not produce Excel specifically for the pharmaceutical industry, so we really can't fault these commercial vendors for having certain design deficiencies when it wasn't part of their design intention. Next slide, please. Okay. There are certain basic realities. If you look across all of the regulatory bodies that deal with life sciences, pharmaceutical industry, commercial product industry, over-the-counter, it really is clear that they are in lockstep in expecting validation of computerized systems where they support regulated activities. There's simply no doubt about that. The EU even names spreadsheet systems as one of the targets. When you look at the common definition, documented evidence providing a high degree of assurance that a system operates accurately and reliably to predefined specifications. That's very important. Predefined specifications, requirements, and the quality attributes. A spreadsheet system, I've had people argue that a spreadsheet system is not a computerized system. I don't know where there's any granularity to that argument. Certainly a spreadsheet application running on a desktop or a laptop computer is a computerized system. There's simply no doubt about it. There was an old senior compliance officer at the FDA who's no longer with them. He's since retired, but someone challenged him one time on, you can't really define a computerized system. And he shot back very simply. He goes, I have two definitions. You can choose the one you like best, software running on hardware or hardware running software. Obviously, spreadsheets are computerized systems. And if they are used to support regulated activities, then they are to be validated for the intended use. Next slide, please, Kevin. Okay, now some harsh reality. As with most regulatory requirements, there are no real shortcuts. It really makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when people start talking about shortcuts to compliance. As I joked with Kevin, I mean, when the policeman pulls you over on the turnpike for going 85 miles an hour in a 55 zone, you can certainly point out to them that you'll get there in a much shorter period of time if you go much faster, but you still have the law. So there are no real shortcuts. When people talk about shortcuts to me when I'm auditing, that does tend to overstimulate me, and it's never a good idea to overstimulate your auditor. People talk to me about, what is the industry secret to avoid compliance validation of spreadsheets. I think people feel that because I know a lot of people at FDA, that there's some sort of secret handshake that I could tell them about when the FDA investigators show up so they wouldn't look at spreadsheets. There simply is no hidden secret. It simply goes back to what we've discussed before. There certainly is no risk assessment approach which trumps regulations. Many of the regulatory bodies encourage you to do risk assessment, but also remember that risk assessment, when applied properly, should show just as many areas where you need to do more as areas where you need to do less. Now, perhaps I've been unfortunate in looking only at companies who do less when they do risk assessment, but I would say in the last 10 years or so in looking at several hundred. I've yet to find risk assessment applied relative to validation where the result is we need to do more. It seems always risk assessment is applied as an effort to do less. Risk assessment, and this is written very clearly, risk assessment is not an alternative to compliance. It simply is not. During this regulatory inspection, if an investigator begins to ask you about your documentation relative to your spreadsheet systems that are supporting regulated activities, you will be expected to provide documentation which provides adequate assurance that that system is operating accurately and reliably, and that it is in compliance with these regulatory quality attributes such as audit trail. Now, if you don't have that, the simple reality is adequate documentation will not be available. So when you actually have an investigation, I don't know how many of our attendees have actually hosted FDA reviews. These are very intense situations. There is an awful lot riding on these reviews, and the FDA investigators are trying their best to determine if a company is compliant or not. So the harsh reality is that when you're asked that question, or if I'm representing somebody who has hired me to assess a company, when that question is asked, either you will have the documentation or you will not. Rumors and realities are different, and you simply must have the documentation. Next, please, Kevin. Now, that being said, there are certainly efficiencies that can be had. It's not a shortcut. It's still an effort to produce the adequate documentation to support your system. But there are efficiencies. The best efficiency I can possibly think of for a company to have relative to computerized system validation is to have a defined process. There really is nothing that will save you as much money relative to validation as having a process that your employees can use for computerized systems. If you don't have that, two things will happen. You'll either pay somebody like me an exorbitant amount of money to come in and develop a process for you each time you validate a computerized system. And the second thing is, when a third party does come to visit you, think of the impression if you have 10 different systems that have followed 10 different processes. Doesn't mean they might not all be compliant, but it does mean that someone like me will probably look much closer than if you have a defined process that I can see you're following. Also true is that validation, like any other regulated activity, is to be defined by procedures or a documented management-endorsed process. It's not something that you just do off the cuff. So, have a process. It's really, really an efficiency in your validation area. Secondly, don't start from scratch each time. You should really only have to write one initial validation plan, one initial set of requirements. Now remember, what I'm saying here is plagiarize, and then go ahead and plagiarize some more. Plagiarism is only a bad thing in grad school when you're copying someone else's previous thesis. Then it's a bad thing. But if Kevin has already validated a spreadsheet, and he has his validation plan, he has his requirements all set up nicely, he has his validation summary report all set up nicely, I can't just use everything he used, but certainly I can use his validation plan and customize it for my system. Remember, a validation plan or a set of requirements or a summary report, there's a lot of repetitive information in there about the company, about who's going to run this, the various categories of requirements, the locations, these types of things. Don't start from scratch each time. An old FDA guy told me one time, If a company writes more than 2 original validation plans, it must be that they changed their process. By all means, if you have a nice computerized system process, once you exercise it the first time, there will be a lot of documents produced that will be perhaps 80% repetitive in the next validation, and so on and so on. Your regulatory requirements will probably remain somewhat the same. And lastly, on efficiencies, and this is something that it just staggers my imagination. I have been to companies where they have tried to validate the entire spreadsheet program. Even Microsoft doesn't validate the entire Excel program. If you don't believe that to be true, you can see that there are many websites set up specifically talking about errors in Excel. Microsoft itself has a site set up to talk about inherent errors in Excel that they have found over time. So, don't try to validate the entire spreadsheet program. Instead, take the FDA at their word. You must validate a system for its intended use. Remember, a spreadsheet is like buying a toolbox with a bunch of tools in it. If you set the toolbox in the middle of your garage with all these wonderful tools in it, it really won't do anything. It's only when you take those tools out and start using them in a certain fashion for a certain job that you then have something that's worthwhile. It's the same with your spreadsheets. They can do a lot of different things, But the reality is you only have to validate them for your intended use. So when you develop your requirements for a spreadsheet, don't include requirements that have nothing to do with how you intend to use the system. You'll burn an awful lot of time, and ultimately you will not be successful. Next slide, please. Okay. This is where people really do get onto thin ice when they start looking at risk relative to regulations. People who take the drugs that we produce in the industry really don't want to hear that we took a lot of risks as we were doing the research on that drug. We took a lot of risks when we were doing the clinical trials on this drug. People just don't want to hear that. I certainly wouldn't want to hear that. Oh, you can take this drug, but we took an awful lot of risks. No. So don't put yourself on thin ice. And don't also convince yourself that spreadsheets, as I was told recently by a CIO, that spreadsheets are really just these little systems that we use for unimportant tasks. Spreadsheets are used to determine dosing. Spreadsheets are used for all sorts of very important things, and don't kid yourself that these cannot become complex systems. I actually had a group working for me one time, and we produced a spreadsheet to track our vendor assessments, supplier assessments. And what started off to be what appeared in my mind to be a rather straightforward approach to a project very, very quickly got out of control with requests for sorting, for queries, for separation of different departments, for various levels of security. Spreadsheets can very, very quickly become extremely complex systems, or they can be very simple, but that doesn't mean that they're not important. Next slide, please, Kevin. Now, I want to really drive this point home. The risk of spreadsheets, although there is regulatory risk, the real risk is business continuity. When you think of that medium-sized company that I had spoken about previously, they had over 400 spreadsheets related to regulated activities. They didn't have 400 of any other type of system, but there were 400 spreadsheets out there being used to gather regulated data, transfer regulated data, assess arithmetically various data. These can really come back to bite you. You need to know if these spreadsheets are accurate or not. It's interesting. I know of one company that used a spreadsheet and to do a study for another company, actually, and the results were quite a surprise to the company that had contracted. They demanded that the study be repeated, which it was, and the same data came back again. Interestingly, when it was examined subsequently, the problem was that an incorrect formula had been placed into a spreadsheet. And although that was never discovered by any regulatory agency, that company was sued for a 7-figure number successfully. Also remember that one of the largest of the pharma companies, not so very long ago, had a pediatric clinical trial where the people on the trial, many of them were given 10 times the intended dose for an extended period of time. And this was obviously very embarrassing to the company that did the study. And it's my understanding from various people that all related to a misplaced decimal point on a spreadsheet. So clearly these things can be used in very critical ways and can really present a huge liability to a company if in fact they're not controlled and accurate. You need to know what's going to happen to protect this data from being compromised. And interestingly, the very business attributes that make spreadsheets so attractive to us are also those same attributes that can lead to bad things happening. Remember my toolbox analogy. Well, spreadsheets are almost infinitely configurable, and they have limitless uses. They are very powerful tools, but that flexibility also opens the door. When Xybion sells a toxicology system, the people they sell it to don't go ahead and change the system into a manufacturing system. It's a toxicology system. It has configuration, obviously, but it's a toxicology system. A spreadsheet can be almost anything. I've seen them used in med device areas, in GLP, GMP, GCP. These are used across the board. They are used in large numbers, and unlike configurations for other large systems where that configuration is generally well thought out by an IT validation group, often that configuration takes place really at the very end user level. Next slide, please, Kevin. Now, if a company does fail to validate spreadsheets, especially those companies that do it knowingly, you're simply asking for regulatory actions. I mean, I can't put it any other way. The FDA has cited people over and over and over again, so it's clear that they're looking at these things and they expect them to be validated. There's just simply no doubt about that. So if management just says, oh, well, we'll just take the risk and not validate them, that's not taking a risk. That is knowingly not complying with a federal regulation. The FDA has one reaction to a company that makes a mistake. We have 10 spreadsheets in my company, and Kevin has validated 9 of them, and on that last one, I didn't do a good job, and we get cited. Okay. But if Kevin's my VP and he comes back and says, you know what, Harry, I don't care if you use these spreadsheets for regulated activities or not, we're not validating them. The FDA reacts very differently to that. If management endorses noncompliance, that's almost an immediate warning letter. Remember, a 483 is one investigator's impression that you have deviated from a regulation. A warning letter is an official action. That's the FDA telling a company, look, you need to correct this. You need to correct this quickly, or we are going to take legal action. Next slide, please. Now, as we had alluded to, spreadsheets are somewhat of a different beast, and that causes us some problems. Spreadsheet distribution and installation is a wonderful thing for businesses across the board. I mean, spreadsheets are powerful, easy-to-use tools. Even someone like me can use a spreadsheet very quickly. Set up a spreadsheet, set up a spreadsheet for dosing. However, it does represent a problem. Again, I can set up a spreadsheet in my laboratory by the end of the day. It's unlikely that somebody would just sneak in a toxicology system. The spreadsheets, the program's already on my laptop. It's not like someone's going to go home and out of their own money buy a toxicology system and bring it in and install it without management's knowledge. But just like at the company I discussed earlier, the CIO had determined that there was probably less than 100 spreadsheets throughout the company being used for regulated work. The actual number was closer to 400. The wide distribution and that broad individual end user configuration, less administrative and IT support and controls, is great. I mean, it makes these very powerful, cheap tools to use. However, it also results in a greater potential for these systems to drift out of control. You have to wonder about security when it comes to these systems. Remember, that spreadsheet application is on my laptop, and when I go to Europe or I go to China or I go home, I take it with me. When applications are loaded on central servers in your server room, when the IT folks go home, they don't unplug the servers and take them with them. When they take a trip to China, they don't take the server with them. They take a laptop with them. So security issues abound when it comes to these types of distributed systems. One of the big problems that I've seen is where you have an Excel spreadsheet that maybe Kevin has like 20 people in his laboratory, and he puts together a spreadsheet to do an arithmetic calculation for some laboratory analysis that's being done. And Kevin's very happy with it, so he distributes it to me, his manager, and I'm very happy with it. So then I distribute it to the 2 lab managers, and they're very happy with it. So they distribute it to the 20 people that work for them, and they're happy with it. And those people then distribute it to people in other laboratories and say, hey, look, if you just change this, it'll work for your lab. So it's interesting then when Kevin says, you know what, I need to make a change to that Excel spreadsheet, and Kevin institutes a change in the configuration. How is that going to be handled? It's not like when you make a change to a single system. Now this thing has been distributed across who knows how many different laptops. How's change control and configuration management going to be handled when you have things distributed, maybe not just in dozens of laptops, but maybe hundreds of laptops in different countries with people that are traveling? So you really have to think when you're using like something like a spreadsheet that's distributed like that, how am I going to, after I validate it, how am I going to maintain that validation, the security, the training, the change control, the configuration management, when it's distributed in so many different places with so many different people? Next, please, Kevin. Okay. As I had said earlier, investigators and auditors in the industry are very aware that people use spreadsheet systems. There's simply no doubt about it. They are also aware that generally commercially provided spreadsheet systems have some deficiencies. Security certainly is one that comes up, but audit trail comes up a lot. Remember that audit trail to the FDA is directly related to record integrity. They need to see an audit trail to know that these things had not been changed, to know when the records had been generated, to know that if there is a change, what was the original number? What was the original entry? Who made the change and why? There's a very good reason in the Part 11 regulation that deals with electronic records why they say that a computerized system must have an obligate audit trail that is not accessible to the user. So it's not that the user can turn an audit trail on and off at their discretion. It's that the audit trail is obligate. An audit trail, again, goes directly to record integrity. If a system does not have an audit trail, the FDA may look at the subsequent records from that system and say they lack integrity. They lack believability because I have no idea if these records have been changed or not. Now, IT staff or techie staff members like Kevin, techie people, might try to mitigate design deficiencies by developing workarounds. I don't want to diminish this effort, but often these workarounds simply don't resolve the compliance deficiency. One of the popular workarounds for spreadsheets is somebody will develop an SOP. They recognize their spreadsheet doesn't have an audit trail, so they develop an SOP that says, if I'm going to make a change to a spreadsheet record that's regulated, then my SOP tells me I must print out the old record and before I make a change to that record and create a new record. Well, again, that is not compliant. That simply puts the audit trail discretion at the end user level. So if I've made a mistake and I decide I want to go back and change it, if I don't print it out, then no one ever knows. That's why audit trails must be computer controlled, not available to the end user to turn them on and off or to decide when to use them or not to use them. Okay, Kevin? Next slide, please. Okay, now on the upside, there's always the yin and yang. Software vendors have recognized that, especially software vendors, responsible ones like Xybion, have recognized for their clients that work in these highly regulated industries, security and audit trail is not just a convenience, it's an absolute requirement to the quality and integrity of these records that are produced by spreadsheets. So software products are produced which operate in tandem with your spreadsheets to mitigate these design gaps. Now remember, whenever you have a non-compliance, the non-compliance remains, but you have to come up with mitigation. So you mitigate this reality that spreadsheets don't have an audit trail design function in them with something in tandem like a software product. These software products, such as Xybion's Compliance Builder product, are readily available. They've been around for a while. They are, as IT people tell me, easy to install. They certainly are inexpensive compared to the cost of non-compliance and the cost of other systems. And importantly, very importantly, it gives you a consistent solution. So if you were to do a corporate license for Compliance Builder or one of these tandem products, then all of your spreadsheets are going to have that same audit trail solution available. It's going to be tested. It's going to be reliable. It's not that everybody that develops a spreadsheet is going to have to tackle this problem individually and waste resources and perhaps put your company in duress of being cited for non-compliance. And certainly it makes an impression on an FDA investigator or an auditor like me if I go to Kevin's pharmaceutical company and I say, hey, Kevin, let's talk a little bit about how you control your spreadsheets. And right out of the box, Kevin says, we validate our spreadsheets, but do recognize that there are certain design deficiencies, and therefore we have purchased, in this case, Compliance Builder, which mitigates that audit trail problem, and we use it across the organization. What that tells me is this organization, Kevin's Pharmaceutical, has understood the regulations and, in fact, have taken actions to mitigate any problems that they might see with compliance. They have been proactive and they have a consistent solution. It gives a very powerful impression to that investigator or to that auditor that, hey, I'm dealing with a class organization here. I'm dealing with people that are trying to do the right thing, as opposed to if I go to Kevin's Pharmaceutical and I say, hey, Kevin, let's talk about spreadsheets. And Kevin says, well, Harry, you know the rumors. You don't have to validate them, so we didn't. And there really aren't audit trails, but, hey, what are you going to do? We didn't design the system. However, we do have an SOP that says if you use an Excel spreadsheet and you change something, you really should print out the old record first. It gives two entirely different impressions and can certainly send an investigation in one direction or another. One of my very favorite phrases is, thou shalt not overstimulate the auditor. People who give me a good story about their compliance are probably going to have a better time during our audit than those who make my life difficult. It's just human nature. So if I think there is blood in the water, I will look for it. But if I get that type of presentation that says, hey, we validate our systems, we have a process, and we actually recognize that there was a design deficiency, but we believe we've got that covered and mitigated because we have a product that we've installed that does provide obligate audit trails for us. It gives me a very positive impression. Next slide, please, Kevin. So in summary, spreadsheets certainly are widely distributed. There's no doubt. They are uniquely configured. They are unbelievably critical to business continuity. If you took those 400 spreadsheets out of that previous company I was talking about, they would quite literally grind to a halt that same day. Regulatory agencies have made it clear to the industry through regulatory actions that they intend these systems to be validated. There are commercial products that can help us, that are inexpensive, powerful tools that can be used across your enterprise. And please, please, please remember, rumors never replace regulations. That's why regulations are written down by agencies, whereas rumors are not. Next slide, please, Kevin.
Yeah, Harry, before we proceed, what I'd like to do is run through a couple of quick kind of follow-up summary slides on our side and then circle back to the questions and answers really quick because there are a few questions that are on the floor that I think are pretty interesting. Real quick, obviously, as we talked in the beginning, there's a reason that Xybion sponsors basically a session of this nature. And certainly the work that we do in life sciences companies and the focus that we have on life sciences companies is important because there are four kind of pressures that are constantly pushing on life sciences companies, whether it's IT governance, global regulatory pressure from things like the FDA, operational efficiency pressures, as well as financial controls and financial regulatory issues around things like Sarbanes-Oxley. There's a lot of pressure pushing on life sciences companies at any given time. And there's a lot of moving parts that chief compliance officers and CIOs and executives at these firms need to be thinking about. So solutions that we kind of bring to bear here at Xybion are meant to alleviate parts or large portions of that. So the compliance builder part of our solution suite is really about being able to plug an application into things that are used every day, like spreadsheets, and make those easier to manage in a regulatory environment. So in the case of spreadsheets like we've talked a lot about today, there's a part of our software, our compliance software application known as Compliance Builder that allows us to kind of attach a technology to spreadsheets to make them much more manageable from an audit standpoint. And some of the materials that will go out after today's session will be around how we can make spreadsheets more manageable within the FDA's world. So I just wanted to kind of give everybody kind of a heads up to that. In particular, there is some things about 21 CFR and Sarbanes-Oxley that are relevant to the compliance builder. There's specific capabilities that are needed to meet those, and Compliance Builder essentially monitors some of these key data sources, whether it's files on workstations, tables and databases, process and manufacturing equipment. So there will be additional information that's going to come out of that. Some of that information will talk about Compliance Builder file, database, and process control. The file piece is really pertinent to the spreadsheet portion of what we talked about today. But with that, let me jump back here. I'm going to go ahead and pause the Q&A portion of this, or pause the recording portion of this here, and then start to